Historic downtown Sioux Falls, when trolley rides were a nickel. Downtown Sioux Falls is a bustling center of activity. It's the state's largest business, governmental, and cultural center. It's filled with banks, shops, offices, hotels, the library, government buildings, and industries. It's the regular home to civic events and festive celebrations. It's also at the center of the city's history. Downtown looked much different in the early days of the city. Its face has been transformed over and again through the decades. Yet it remains the city's most historic area. A sharp-eyed detective can still find many reminders of times long past, reminders of what life was like in early Sioux Falls. How did the city begin? Who lived here? Why did they come? And how did the city grow? What did people do for fun? How did they dress? And how did they travel? The clues remain for those who look closely. The first settlers to arrive were not homesteading farmers, they were land developers. They hoped to get rich by claiming the best town sites before the arrival of railroads and settlers, so they could sell building lots to the people who were sure to arrive later. These land speculators came seeking the impressive falls that they had heard about. The natural beauty and potential water power for industry made the place a natural choice for a new city. One of the earliest industries to use water power was the massive Queen Bee Mill, built to grind grain. It was a dismal failure that closed 2 years after it opened. There wasn't enough wheat, and the water flow wasn't dependable. The Queen Bee burned in a spectacular fire in 1956. Its walls were torn down, and the ruins that remain are now on the National Register of Historic Places. But imagine what the Dakota region looked like when these fortune seekers first set out for the falls. The prairie had almost no trees. As far as the eye could see in every direction, there was nothing but a vast sea of tall grass growing as high as a man's shoulders. Great undulating waves of motion swept through the wind-driven grass. They must have felt tremendous excitement when they at last crested the bluff to look down into the valley of the Big Sioux River. For the river and falls were indeed a special place. They stood out in this huge, empty prairie like an oasis in a desert. Richard Pettigrew, our first senator, had this oil painting made to show what Sioux Falls looked like when he arrived in 1869, 12 years after the first arrivals claimed the town site. The buildings are Fort Dakota, located about where the downtown Holiday Inn now sits. Notice the two islands? The trail crossing the river near the small island is now 9th Street downtown. The only trees were on a large island just above the falls, protected from prairie fires by the river. And the roar of the falls could be heard for miles in these quieter times. Known as Saney Island, or simply the island, it was important to the early village residents as a place for recreation. Although privately owned, it served unofficially as the city's first park. It was the site of elaborate community gatherings, such as festive 4th of July celebrations, complete with sack races, greased pole climbing contests, and fireworks. The island was also a popular picnic destination for the early settlers, such as these finely dressed people in their elegant carriage, crossing the channel for a picnic lunch on the island. This popular spot of shade and beauty was destroyed more than 70 years ago. The river became polluted and smelly. A dam built for an electric power plant blocked water from flowing into the westerly channel. The channel was filled in, railroads built tracks and switching yards, and the island disappeared. The river itself was a source of recreation. Many enjoyed boating on the river. There were boat docks by the other smaller islands at the foot of 9th Street. People could rent a rowboat or ride a small steam-powered boat there and travel upstream to 2nd Island, the present-day site of Leif Erikson Day Camp, for a relaxing picnic excursion. Years later, a dance hall was built on the small 9th Street Island. Today, the river ramp parking ramp is built on top of it. Of course, people also enjoyed a trip to the falls back then, just as we do today. They often dressed in their Sunday best to make the day a special outing. Whether just relaxing or fishing, a day spent at the falls meant fun. The river was a playground for the city's early settlers in many ways. The frozen river served as the community skating rink in the winter. The snow was removed and a maintained skating area was provided on the river at the east edge of downtown. When the weather warmed up in the summer, the river served as the swimming pool, providing a cool spot for a refreshing dip. The people of early Sioux Falls played in much the same way as we do today, but in different places. This baseball game and the spectator stand was near 10th Street and Prairie Avenue. The house 2 blocks north in the background is the A.C. Phillips residence. Today, it still sits on the hill across the alley behind the Pettigrew Home and Museum. These sledders are on the 8th Street Hill, possibly on the front yard of the site of the Pettigrew Home heading towards downtown. The Phillips house appears again in this image. It was possible and popular to ride a sled all the way from 7th and Duluth down to the river. There were even tennis courts. These people are playing in the area now occupied by the tall U.S. West building. The building in the background is the City Auditorium, shown here shortly after its construction in 1899. It wasn't all play, of course. People worked downtown, too, such as these men working on an early Phillips Avenue improvement project. These ladies are packing boxes at the Manchester Biscuit Company, a bakery wholesaler in Sioux Falls. These men are also employees of the Manchester Biscuit Company. Downtown employees still work in the same building today, which is now occupied by Raven Industries. Downtown was a pretty fully developed place as early as 1873, when the city had nearly 600 residents and a full range of shops, markets, and offices. There were hardware stores, general stores, meat markets, drug stores, tobacco and shoe stores, lumber yards, doctor's offices, blacksmith shops, a barber, restaurants, bakeries, churches, saloons, and offices. Nearly all of this village was within the area we now think of as downtown. The stores were small wood frame buildings like these on Phillips Avenue in 1872. At that time, the streets were simple dirt roads. 5 years later, in 1877, wooden sidewalks were added to Phillips Avenue to make it easier to get around. These wood walkways were built 8 feet wide and constructed of 1-inch thick lumber, like this one in front of the E.G. Wright Law Office as it appeared in 1880. Longtime city residents know that downtown was transformed by urban renewal in the 1970s, when whole blocks full of historic buildings were demolished to make room for the new library, the downtown Holiday Inn Hotel, and new banks, office buildings, and parking ramps. But the appearance of downtown saw dramatic, sweeping changes almost 90 years before urban renewal began. While it was the falls that first brought people here, it was the arrival of the railroads that sparked explosive growth. The railroads brought thousands of settlers to South Dakota, ushering in a period of great economic growth and prosperity. The first train steamed into downtown Sioux Falls on August 1st, 1878. The train service had a dramatic impact on Sioux Falls. Within 3 years, the city of 600 residents grew to 2,164. This bird's-eye view map was drawn just a few years after the first railroad arrived. It shows what the city looked like when it had just over 2,000 residents. The road on the outskirts of the city at the top of the map is Prairie Avenue. The road at the city's southern edge is 14th Street. Nearly all of these buildings are within the area that is now our downtown. Note that the islands are still prominent features of the city. More rail lines were soon to come, and the city in this picture was about to be transformed with even more new growth. The city's population of 2,164 residents in 1880 exploded to over 10,000 residents at the end of the decade. The 1880s came to be remembered as the Great Dakota Boom Decade. Eventually, the city was served by 7 different railroads, bringing more prosperity and even more rapid growth. This tremendous, rapid growth did more than bring new people. The look of downtown and the city itself changed at a galloping pace as a result of the prosperity and access to materials brought by the rails. Phillips Avenue, which once looked like this with its small shops, looked like this by 1900. Most of the modest wood frame buildings were replaced by large, grand structures built of brick and stone. Sioux Falls boasted all the features and amenities of a major city. Train service continued to grow. By 1907, a promotional brochure boasted that Sioux Falls had 60 trains per day of all kinds arriving and departing, and that there were 24 passenger trains entering the city daily, except Sunday, with the same number departing. With rail lines radiating in every direction, Sioux Falls became a major business center, shipping products throughout the region. The depots built for the trains were often very fancy. Some looked like small temples of transportation. The Rock Island Depot, shown here, was built in 1886. It still looks much as it did when it was first built. About a year later, this passenger depot was built for the Illinois Central Railroad. Located near 8th Street and the river, this depot served passengers until the early 1960s. It, too, remains in use today, but as an office building. The old Milwaukee Depot, built in 1894, also still remains downtown at 5th and Phillips. While it is still a useful building, it has been greatly changed. The years have not been kind to this building. From the start, rail service made Sioux Falls a jumping-off point for the early pioneer homesteaders. The city became a gateway for those stopping off for supplies on their way to settle the rest of the state. Downtown grew as a regional distribution center, providing all manner of goods and services. There were lumber yards, liveries, wagon repair shops, and land offices for filing claims. Notice this horse moved while being photographed and looks like it has no head. People had to sit very still for the old-fashioned cameras used long ago. Huge grocery warehouses, too, were built to store the necessary supplies that were shipped west. One of these was the Keene Grocery Warehouse. The building is still located at 6th and Phillips. Another was the Jewett Brothers and Jewett Grocery Warehouse, now home to the Sioux Falls Brewing Company. There were many hotels built during this period of growth. Among them were the Central House, the Sherman House, the Merchants Hotel, the Commercial House, and the Phillips House, shown here. The gentleman with his hand on the top hat is President Teddy Roosevelt during a visit to Sioux Falls. The Merchants Hotel was nearly destroyed by the Great Flood of 1881. A large hole was chopped in the building to let the water through. The Merchants Hotel, located at 6th and Phillips, burned down in 1912. It was replaced by the Albert House, a newer historic building which still occupies the site. The city's first, most famous, and most important hotel, though, was the Cataract Hotel, built at the corner of 9th and Phillips in 1871, before the city had any railroads. It had 14 rooms and was known as the best hotel in Dakota Territory. We can watch almost 130 years of changes take place on this special corner and better understand the influences that reshaped and rebuilt all of downtown. Like most of the oldest downtown buildings, the small wood hotel was soon replaced with a bigger, more substantial structure. A large brick hotel was built next to the first Cataract in 1878. 4 years later, the old wood building was moved off the site when the new hotel building was expanded again with another even larger building. The pair of buildings on the corner became the second Cataract Hotel. The Cataract retained its reputation as Sioux Falls' finest place to stay and dine. The Cataract Corner became the heart of downtown because the hotel was such an important meeting place. The site is still the central point of the city. When the city began its street address numbering system in 1886, the Cataract corner of 9th and Phillips was set as the center point. The first block in each direction was given a 100 number, with the numbers growing larger with each block further away from the center. These two cataract buildings burned in 1900 when fireworks in the front window display area ignited. The devastating fire led to the founding of a professional fire department because the volunteer department failed to save the building. The fire department eventually got a new stone firehouse built in 1912, which still remains in use on Minnesota Avenue today. Even professional firemen, however, couldn't always save a building, such as when the Fannells department store on Phillips Avenue burned on a winter day in 1918. The cataract fire also influenced new construction. The Carpenter Hotel, built 12 years after the fire, was constructed almost entirely of concrete. Originally, there was a large sign on the roof which boasted that the Carpenter was a fireproof hotel. After the devastating fire, a brand new Cataract Hotel was built in 1901. It continued to be one of the finest places to stay. Much later, after World War II, many people thought the old downtown buildings were beginning to look tattered and bedraggled. A big trend was to make the old buildings look new. Like many downtown buildings, the first floor was modernized, but the smooth, plain style of the modern first floor failed to match the fancy architectural details of the older upper floors. This third remodeled cataract is the one most of today's older residents remember. It was torn down in 1974 as part of the Urban Renewal Program, a plan for reviving downtown. Urban Renewal cleared this entire block for new development. The same thing happened on many other downtown blocks. The Cataract's old site is now occupied by this bank building. The original wood cataract moved one last time to 120 South Duluth, was turned sideways on the lot, and today remains as an apartment building on that site. A thriving stone industry also helped the young city grow. Much harder than granite, the abundant supply of Sioux quartzite, called jasper in the old days, combined strength and beauty more perfectly than any other stone used for buildings. Hundreds of people worked for the quarries. There were 5 quarries in the city by 1890, and 2 company towns quarried the stone a few miles east of Sioux Falls. A good cutter was in constant demand. The workers were mainly Scandinavian, Welsh, Scottish, and English stonecutters who came here for jobs in the stone quarries. The English stonecutters brought with them the practice of Christmas caroling. One firm paid its stonecutters 2 cents per block in 1886, and at that time a cutter earned a good wage of about $4 to $5.50 per day for a 10-hour day. The work site where a group of cutters, like these men, made the blocks was called a motion. One quarry produced 30,000 hand-cut street paving stones each day. It was the railroads that helped the quarries become a major local industry. The stone was quarried for use in fine buildings both here in Sioux Falls and in other cities far away. The rails allowed city quarries to ship the stone to Chicago, St. Louis, Sioux City, Detroit, Omaha, and many other cities. The stone was also cut into blocks to use for paving streets. These men are installing the quartzite blocks to pave a street in Chicago. Quartzite street pavers were used extensively in downtown Sioux Falls. The stone streets became rough and uneven over the years, and the stone was replaced with wood blocks around 1914. These served for about 18 years, and then the wood was replaced with asphalt. The street paving stones can still be seen in some places in Sioux Falls, as in this Cathedral neighborhood street, or like these street paving stones reused at Falls Park. The largest quarry was at a company town known as East Sioux Falls. It had more than 500 employees at its peak. The quarry town was connected to downtown by an electric streetcar line in 1890. This was the first ever electric rail car service in the state, with tracks extending about 6 miles. The trolley line lasted just a few years. This quarry company was especially proud of the purplish color of their quartzite, used in many very handsome buildings, such as the Carnegie Library Building and the Old Courthouse Museum. The East Sioux Falls stone was also used for the grand Federal Post Office building. The skill needed to cut and build with this hard stone is demonstrated in this picture of the Federal building when it was under construction in 1892. A third floor was later added, and the beautiful quartzite building still has a dignified presence on Phillips Avenue today. Arts, culture, and entertainment also played a part in the growth of downtown. In the early days of the movies, the number of downtown theaters expanded greatly. In 1919, people went downtown to see movies on the Strand, the Princess, the Olympia, the Jewel, the Colonial, and the Orpheum theaters. The Orpheum, shown here under construction in 1913, is now the Community Playhouse. It is the earliest and best preserved theater remaining in the city and is in near original condition. It was used for both motion pictures and for vaudeville shows performed live on stage. Early stars appearing at the Orpheum include Jack Benny, Stan Laurel, and ventriloquist Edgar Bergen with Charlie McCarthy. Downtown movie theaters in the 1930s and 1940s included the Dakota, the Egyptian, the State, Granada, Time, and the Hollywood. The Egyptian was on 10th Street, about a block west of Phillips Avenue. The State Theater opened with great fanfare in 1926. The extravagant and elegant theater was advertised as glorious as a fairyland, yet sturdy as the pyramids. It was the state's largest movie theater up until the day it closed its doors in the late 1980s. It initially showed silent movies accompanied by music on the $25,000 Mighty Wurlitzer organ. It also had a stage for touring vaudeville performers. Movie tickets for adults cost 50 cents, and advertisements announced children anytime, 10 cents. Going back to the railroads and rapid growth of the 1880s, the young city also needed to develop power plants to prosper. The first electricity was generated at the Cascade Mill on the east side of the river next to the 8th Street Bridge downtown. The water-powered generators began providing electricity for streetlights in 1884 at a cost of 50 cents per light per night. Today, the mill and the power plant are long gone. A new hotel occupies the site, and the Sioux River Greenway path graces the river's bank. At the same time that electricity was used to light the streets, gas street lamps were also in place. The city contracted with the Sioux Falls Gas Company to provide gas for streetlights, beginning in 1883 through 1901, after which the gas lights were phased out and replaced with electric lights. The gas street lamps looked like this one at the corner of 9th and Phillips. City engineer Reuben Bragstad wrote in 1967 that he well remembers seeing a lamplighter who was employed by the city making his daily round with horse and two-wheeled cart as he stopped at each lamppost, climbed up, and lit the gas burner each evening. Again, he made his rounds to turn them off. The gas company building, shown on the left here, operated near the river at the site known today as Faywick Park. Many buildings had both gas and electric light fixtures at the same time. Unfortunately, as the company turned coal into gas, they dumped the gooey coal tar into a pit on the site and buried it. Not all reminders of the past are good ones. Faywick Park had to be dug up to remove the coal tar and to keep the river clean. The hydroelectric plant at Falls Park was built in 1908, more than 20 years after the Cascade Mill's construction. This water-powered electric plant provided power for an electric streetcar system. The Sioux Falls traction system had a network with about 5 miles of tracks for its electric trolleys and began operation in 1908. Ultimately, it served the city with 5 lines, all of which originated downtown. The Phillips Avenue line appears here during a rugged winter. The electric trolleys came to an end in 1930 because of increasing competition with the new motor cars. The company added some motor buses for a while called jitney buses in an unsuccessful effort to compete with the automobile. Jitney was a word that meant nickel and was used for these buses because they charged a nickel per ride. Of course, well before there were electric streetcars, people relied on the horse for transportation within the city. The horse and buggy and carriages took people from place to place. The horse and wagon were used for deliveries and by pioneer homesteaders heading west, although strong oxen might be substituted for the horse to pull the heavy wagons. Notice the stone quartzite pavers on this downtown street. This wagon is prepared to deliver meat to city residents. Horse-drawn wagons delivered milk and dairy products to homes as late as 1952, in part because the horses knew the routes and places to stop. But groceries weren't the only items delivered. People used river ice to keep food cold in the ice boxes in their homes before there was electricity and modern refrigerators. This fleet of large wagons delivered the ice. They also brought coal to people, which they burned to heat their homes. Rail tracks were installed on city streets for horse-drawn trolleys long before the electric trolleys came along. This was the earliest public transportation in the city. R.F. Pettigrew's Sioux Falls Street Railway Company had an extensive system of tracks throughout downtown and into nearby neighborhoods. Service began in 1887 and continued for 12 years. It cost a nickel to ride, and the track extended as far south as 45th Street, connecting downtown with the colleges. The eventual mix of automobile and horse traffic on the streets caused great concern. A city ordinance passed in 1903, when automobiles in the city were very new and very few, set a speed limit of 7 miles per hour, except when turning corners, when the speed must not exceed 4 miles per hour. Even though things look much different today, one thing that hasn't changed is downtown's role as an exciting place where fun things happen, such as festivals, parades, and celebrations. Whether it's the Parade of Lights, listening to music during the Hot Summer Nights event, or browsing through the many colorful booths during the Sidewalk Arts Festival, people still come downtown to enjoy themselves just as they did when Sioux Falls was still very young. The circus, for instance, used to be a part of the excitement downtown. The circus trains would unload downtown, and there would be a parade from the tracks to the circus grounds just across the river. These elephants are marching down Phillips Avenue on their way to the circus grounds. This parade, located on Main Avenue, took place in 1896 when Buffalo Bill and his Wild West show came to Sioux Falls. His show was brought in as a special attraction to ensure the success of a tri-state fair. It was said that the whole countryside turned out to see the spectacular shooting tricks and horseback stunt riders. High up on a ladder, this daredevil diver is leaping into a small tank of water, thrilling the people gathered on 9th Street. The building in the background is the Cataract Hotel. There was even a Ferris wheel set up right on Phillips Avenue for one early event. This picture shows Phillips Avenue between 9th and 10th Streets. The Beach Pay building can be seen in the background, just to the right. This red brick 1887 building still remains downtown. It's been fixed up and given a new life in recent years. Even though the look of downtown has changed so much over the many years, it's now becoming increasingly popular to fix up and reuse the old buildings. Quite often, the results are stunning. When this modernized storefront was removed and the gray paint replaced, the historic charm of the old building can be enjoyed. Another historic building just down the block was recently transformed. Its worn-out, tattered appearance has been replaced with a bright new look that is actually the old, original look. It's reassuring to see this kind of care and attention being given to the special old places, because it means that the reminders of our days long past will still be around for future generations to enjoy.